Hello, and welcome to Artbeat, a monthly podcast where we connect with artists to explore their practice and journey as a creative. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Bree Smith, a North Dallas-based, multidisciplinary artist whose work focuses on sci-fi pop surrealism. In this conversation, we will discuss finding your niche, managing your time to create and set deadlines, and the importance of having an art community. Bree will share advice and insight from her experience in her former residency at the Village Church and how her practice has evolved from there. She will also tell us about resources like Art House Dallas and the Creative Pep Talk podcast. I'm so excited to have you on, Bree. Thanks for joining. And I guess to jump into things, I'll start with, where we connected first, because we know each other through a few different things now, but talking about Art House Dallas, which is a nonprofit organization that we're both affiliated with. And I was able to go to the Art of Business workshop. It was like a weekend workshop. And there you were a panelist and you got to talk a little bit about your brand and your artist statement and everything. And that was a really exciting workshop for me. I don't know if you've attended those before, but it was really cool getting to hear you and the other artists speak. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. But before we get into it, let's just, start with who you are and where you're at in your art journey.
So yeah, I call myself a multidisciplinary artist. I think that's kind of a way of me saying I like a bunch of different kinds of mediums and I can't really decide on one to stick with. So I like to dabble in a lot of different things, but mostly I do mixed media paintings with acrylic and oils. And then I also do murals like you mentioned. And then I've also been dabbling in different sculpture type mediums recently. And so that's what I like to use. Again, I like to play and explore with all kinds of different things, but those are the things I do most of the time. And then as far as my subject matter goes, my work focuses on themes of futuristic surrealism and abstraction. And a phrase I came up with a few weeks ago was Sci-Fi Pop Surrealism. So it's kind of like a weird, a mashup of a few things. So I really like science fiction. Was introduced to it by my dad as a small child. Really has been something that's been a constant in my life. He passed away when I was 15. And so it's also kind of a way of me feeling close to him. But I also love pop art. And so, I love using lots of bright colors and I love surrealism, just kind of, creating different scenes and situations that you would normally see, lots of symbolism, that kind of thing. So yeah, lots of bright colors. I love highlighting women in very strong scenarios a lot of times in my work. And then I do a lot of I don't even think I mentioned it, but I do a lot of astronauts. So I like featuring women as astronauts and creating different scenes where they're, exploring or sometimes I like to put astronauts in situations in the past. So I have some kind of retro futuristic mashups as well. So yeah, that's a lot, but that's basically it.
That's awesome. That is such a cool niche that you came up with. The phrase that you came up with, sci-fi pop surrealism. Is that what it is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. For every niche, there is an audience, right? So that's a very vibrant community that you're tapping into there. So very
Yes.
exciting.
It's always exciting when you find your people.
So at the Art of Business workshop that I mentioned, we heard a little bit about your brand. And I know that the panelist, the interviewer, was talking about your presence on social media and how your brand overall seems very cohesive. And so I know you've already talked about that, but I just want to touch on your artist statement as well. You stated it so eloquently during the workshop. Could you give that to us here on the podcast again?
I don't even remember what I said, but I'm glad you thought it was good.
No, it's
Um,
good.
but no, I mean, really, when I was thinking about, my answer to this question, my artist statement or artist bio or what have you, it's been a work in progress for many, many years. And that's why I can't even remember what I said because I'm always reworking it over and over again.
And you
You
came up
know,
with your phrase recently, the sci-fi
yes,
pop surrealism.
yes.
So I'm sure you're working that in as well.
Exactly. And, that came about because I was filling out, some application for something or other, and they asked what my style was. And I was like, oh, shoot. Like, I don't really fit into one of the like broader buckets. So I was like, well, let me think about it. And then I just kind of came up with my own. So, yeah, it's always something that I'm thinking about and reworking over and over again, especially for the context. So, what you may see on my website, it may be different than what I would put somewhere else or say in public. So,
So I guess that's the answer to the question, is that it's always reworking itself through experiences that you have or what you're doing with your art at the time. So that's great. That's a
yeah,
great answer.
exactly. It's so hard to write your artist statement right. Like, I think one thing that's frustrating when you're first starting out is you feel like everyone has the perfect artist statement. You're like, how the heck did they come up with that? It's so beautiful and meaningful and resonates. And I just want to say again, like it takes years to get there. But also one of the things I've been playing with for the past probably year or so is, jotting down my thoughts and what I want to say more in like a bullet point form. And then honestly, I will put it into like Chat GPT and have it kind of fill in the blanks for me. And you can even have it write several versions for you, right? Like if it sounds too stuffy or formal, you can have it rewrite it more casual. And that's been a way, a tool I found that has really helped me fill in the words that I'm always like, I can't find the right word, and it really helps with that. So just throwing that out
Yeah.
there.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I use ChatGPT and Perplexity AI as well, pretty
Oh, cool.
frequently, whether it's research or helping rewrite something. It's like having someone right next to you to
Yes.
proofread something or give their opinion. And sometimes I take
Yes.
it and sometimes I don't. Sometimes like, no.
That's
When I
great.
had,
I'll have to look up
yeah.
Perplexity AI. I haven't heard of that one.
It's a good one because I think, and I'm not up to date now on ChatGPT, but I know when I first started using it not that long ago, the data that it pulled from was before the last 2 or 3 years. So it wasn't
Mm,
exactly up to date. And from what I understand of Perplexity AI is that it is up to date. So it
nice.
pulls from all places on the internet today and
Oh, that's great. Oh, I'll
for all
definitely have to
time,
check
I
it out.
guess.
Yeah, all of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, try it and let me know. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, well, that's great. But yeah, I just want to put it out there because, I don't want artists to feel like, it's cheating or anything like that. Like you said, it's really like kind of like having an editor sitting next to you, which is great.
It's a tool, right? I
Yep.
mean, and work smarter, not harder, right? So
Yes,
eh,
100%.
we'll talk a little bit about this later, but just kind of thinking about places where you spend a lot of your time and effort versus other areas of your practice or business where you delegate a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And you kind of look for some help. So that's
Yep.
great. Let's jump back a little bit to like maybe when you first thought that you might be an artist. I know you said that you are very connected through your subject matter with your dad, and that relationship has been all your life. And you said that he passed away when you were younger. So is that when you started doing art or expressing yourself in that way, or did it happen before then?
Yeah, it actually happened way before then. It's so interesting the things we remember are like our earliest memories, right? But one of my earliest memories, it's so funny. I remember being like in preschool. I have an older brother, and when I was little, I wanted to do everything he wanted to do. And so at the time, Ninja Turtles was like huge. And of course, he wanted to watch Ninja Turtles. So of course, I wanted to watch and love Ninja Turtles too. And so one of my earliest memories is being at preschool and like drawing Ninja Turtles. I just remember like kids coming up to me and asking me to draw them like their favorite Ninja Turtle. I just remember that feeling, even now, I must have been very young and my drawings are probably not very good, but just like how good that made me feel. And that was kind of a recurring theme for me growing up. It was, I not very athletic. um I don't have like a ton of talents, but the one thing that I always got praised for was my artistic talent. And so I think like being a natural like people pleaser, kind of golden retriever type person, I was like, yes, I want more of that feeling. And so I just kind of kept going with it because I would get that positive reinforcement as a kid. But I grew up in a small town in East Texas, and that wasn't a very common like hobby or vocation there, right? So I didn't know any professional artists. We didn't have any art museums close by to go to. It was really just something I did for me and really didn't ever think about it being a profession for a long, long time. I think graduating from high school, my mindset was more of like, how do I provide for myself and how do I get a paycheck? And again, just never occurred to me to pursue art at all in that way. And so I didn't even go to school initially to be an art major, which is so funny to me looking back. After the first semester in college, I didn't have any art classes. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I have this big hole in my life. Something is missing." And I realized I couldn't cut that out of my life because it was such a big part of who I was and expressing myself and so yeah, after first semester in college, I like went and changed my major to art and never looked back. Again, it's weird. Like you'll see this recurring pattern in my stories is like I didn't think I was an artist and then I realized I was an artist, but I didn't think I was an artist and then I realized I was an artist. It's kind of up and down thing that has happened constantly with me. So I got my art degree and at the end of that, I was like, what's next? I don't really know like what I want to do because again, it never occurred to me to either a pursue full time as an artist with some kind of other supplemental income or being a teacher. Like those things had never occurred to me until after I graduated. I think about a year after I graduated from college, I was like, well, being an art teacher might be something I could pursue because I was actually really inspired by my high school art teacher. She really opened my eyes. Again, didn't really have a lot of exposure to the arts growing up, but she really kind of broadened my horizons, if you will, by exposing me to different kinds of art. And I was like, well, I would like to be that for kids and the next generation or whatever. So like I can get my heart into that. Like, yeah, I can do that. And so I actually became an art teacher for a few years. But again, like during that time, I wasn't really making art for myself outside of like making the examples to like show the kids and stuff. I really wasn't, yeah, creating for me. And so ultimately, ended up walking away from being a teacher because I felt again this kind of like thing missing in my life. Like I want to create art. So I decided to get into design because I felt like it would be a way for me to be creative, but also wouldn't kind of like zap all of my artistic energy because it's very different kind of creativity when you're creating design work for clients or for someone else. They're kind of giving you all of the guidelines, right, and rules to follow. And so again, I kind of felt something was missing, but I took like a 7-year break after college. It's what it ended up being. It was like 7 years from graduating college until I decided it was like in 2015, I think. I was like, I just felt this urge to start creating again. And at that point, I just started kind of like slowly getting back into it. And I'm happy to say that since about that time, I haven't really abandoned it at all. I've been pretty consistent since then, but it took me a long time and lots of ups and downs getting there. So,
I'm glad that you mentioned that you took that long of a break. I can definitely relate to that. Whenever I did graduate with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, that was my concern as well was, okay, well, I'll figure out how to integrate this in later, but my 9 to 5, I'm going for a classic 9 to 5
mhm,
because stability and support was on the forefront, right? It was
yep.
my main priority, just being able to pay rent and stand myself up in society and then figure out the art piece later. And so there's a few more pieces to that. Like was I was graduating school in a different area in Texas where I had made some connections and then coming back to Dallas feeling like I needed to start over. And it's difficult to do that even if it is within the same state. Yeah, so that was something that I let hold me back, I think, that I probably shouldn't have, but at the time I was just worried about the paycheck. So
Yeah.
that's where I was going to focus my attention, and then you blink and many years go by.
It just
So
happens. Yeah.
I know. So I can definitely relate. I'm glad that you shared that part of your story because I can definitely understand where you're coming from there. So having a teacher background and more recently a design background, how does that feed into your creative process? What kind of things are you taking from your other experience in either your job or just life?
And so much. But I think in many ways, they're very complementary to each other. Having the design work that I'm doing during the day and then the artistic work, I think that the constraints I have with my design work, it fuels me and it gets me excited about my artwork, about my studio practice because when I go to my studio, I get to decide, And so it gets me all excited to make my art, by working at my day job. And then with my art, it's kind of like the flip side of that. It's like, sometimes when you are making all of the decisions and you are self-driving at that work, that's very challenging when you don't have someone giving you deadlines or feedback constantly or saying this is done or even telling you what to do next, right? Like you have all that in the day job. And so the lack of boundaries that I have in my studio practice, I seek that out and enjoy that in my full-time employment. So they very much complement each other and it's interesting to see kind of like that push pull with both of them because I've had moments and probably always will where I'm like, oh, I wish I could just make art all the time. But in reality, like knowing myself, like how that would probably play out. and but I do hope to have like enough personal growth at some point in my life where I can be like, okay, yes, I can have the discipline to drive myself forward, on my own and like run my own ship, if you will. So that's the goal is to have enough personal growth to be that person. But right now, it's very good for me to have structure.
So when it comes to making your own art in your studio practice, what needs to happen before you can start creating? Like what are the circumstances where you feel like, okay, I can get started?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So I constantly have ideas. I keep like a note in my phone where it's literally just like a brain dump where if I'm like out and about or going throughout my day and I just have like a random thought, I just go write it down. And I try to log and document as many of those as possible because sometimes if I don't, I'm like, I had a great idea. What was it? It's going to drive me crazy. And then you almost get into this like endless loop where you remember it and you still don't write it down, that kind of thing. So yeah, so I try to keep a running list of ideas. So that really hasn't ever been a barrier for me. It's more so vetting out the ideas, thinking in terms of series of work to where this idea that like really excites me, but like where does it really fit within my larger body of work and does it make sense? Or maybe, this idea could spin off into like a mini series or something if, I find it interesting and exciting enough. So vetting ideas is probably one of the more challenging aspects. But, once I've landed on like, okay, yeah, I want to explore this, thinking about how I want to do it. Cause again, the past couple of years, I've really been on this journey of figuring out my process and how I like to work and what mediums I like to use best. And that has resulted in me pretty much abandoning paintbrushes altogether because I realized I feel more connected to the artwork and I feel more control with my fingers for whatever reason. And I enjoy the process more and I enjoy the result more when I just use my hands. And so, if I have an idea, then the next step is like, okay, is this a finger painting that I'm going to do with oil? Or is this more of like, do I see it more of like collage and like textural? Kind of think about that. And again, back up to the series I'm working on and where it fits and all of that. And, I do leverage a lot my iPad to kind of sketch out things. I like doing digital sketches because I feel like I can explore different ideas quickly and like cross them off the list. When I'm picking out colors, like a color palette, for example, I can see like, will this color work here? Nope, I can change it, like that. And or if it's like collage or if I'm even trying to like visualize that concept I have in my head because again like I use a lot of futuristic things that don't really exist in real life. And so I can kind of collage together something digitally so that I can visualize my idea and see like, well, does this really work? Does the composition need some tweaking, that kind of thing. And yeah, from there it's just execution. But I always I found for myself personally, I know everyone doesn't work this way, but like having my reference on, to come back to and kind of explore there has been really crucial to me in my process. So yeah, that's a bunch of answers, but I kind of have to have all those ingredients going before I'm like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, so it doesn't just happen. Like it's planned
Mm-mm.
out, it's thoughtful, you have a consistent series that you're working on and all of these ideas that come from everywhere.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to keep tabs on, right? So, I
Yep.
get that.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's like you have to have all the ingredients before you start baking, you know? Like
right? Yeah. Yeah. So, a lot of artists have a hard time figuring out what they want to say with their artwork
Mm,
or what they want to paint or sculpt or create, especially ones who have gone through like technical training. And so they know how
yes.
to paint an apple or a portrait, and they're still looking for making something that excites them. They're still looking for that subject or that goal that they want to work toward. But you have the privilege of knowing very much what you like to paint and what you enjoy creating. That's amazing. So what does that mean to you to make something that you have such a strong connection to and that you enjoy so much?
I want to back up a little bit because, yes, I do have a very clear vision now, but it took me a long time to get there. And it wasn't like, I think I mentioned in 2015, I just kind of like, snapped, snapped awake and decided I want to, start making art again. I mean, I didn't know back then what I was going to do. I had no clue. And that was, I would say, probably the biggest barrier for me getting back into art after a long break. Because, like you said, having that technical training can honestly really mess with your head. I wasn't ever told or given the idea of exploring finger painting in college, you know? Like
Yeah.
the first, I think like 2 or 3 years, it was lots of like doodling, sketching, really just like getting my supplies out and doing whatever just to explore. And it was a very frustrating time because I had no clue what I wanted to make. And at that point, I was really trying to I listened to a ton of the Creative Pep Talk podcast back then. And the host, his name is Andy J. Pizza. That's not his real name. I forget his actual last name, but he's great. And he gives a lot of great advice for creatives and how we go about our practice. And he gave me the idea or the advice one time in one of his podcasts about like listening to your signals, like your body's signals, like kind of thinking of like a car, like your check engine lights on your dash or whatever. And he recommended, if you're going about in your creative work, play, exploration, what have you, pay attention to what you like, what makes you feel good, and pay attention to what you don't like. And, he even recommended, and I still do this, like saving, because us artists, we like collecting things and, Pinterest boards, all that stuff. And he recommended, if you didn't already have a bunch of like things saved on your Pinterest board, or like for me, I would save a lot of artwork I liked on Instagram, start building up a collection of things that you like as you go along, consuming content, and then go back and look at those things and see what patterns are emerging for you. Like what things you are drawn to automatically without even realizing it. And so that was really critical for me was, paying attention to what I liked and what I didn't like, going back and reviewing like visually what pieces of art I'm drawn to. And that's kind of where I discovered, well, I mean, I like lots of things, but that was really crucial in helping me kind of guide my path. But, I think the turning point for me was in 2017. I think it was the end of 2017 into 2018, kind of that like school year, if you will, fall and spring. I did a kind of a residency with the Village Church as an artist, and it was really cool because they provided like a studio space for you, and then at the end of the program, you had like an exhibition in the Village Churches. They kind of have like this gallery space, which is really nice. And so there's a lot of pressure there, right? I was like, okay, I have to figure this out. What the heck am I doing? And I mean, it really just took like coming into the studio every day and sometimes and just like doodling, sketching, whatever came to mind and like getting it out. I want to say that at some point during that program, something I read or something we had in the discussion, because there was some other, like there was some business residents and there was like a singer songwriter resident as well. And we would have discussions monthly. And I think in one of our discussions, something kind of like piqued my interest that kind of got me onto the kind of science fiction vein, but kind of more in the realm of like Revelations 21 of like the new heaven and the new earth. And that really, I guess, like sparked. my curiosity. And so my first series that I created during that residency was called New Earth. And it was like all these really otherworldly abstracts that I came up with. And I mean, it really just started with me like pouring paint on a canvas and like moving it around and just intuitively following where I felt it was leading me. And I still do some of those works now. They look a little bit different, but that was a process that I came up with just by, again, just literally forcing myself to do it and listening to those things that sparked my interest and intrigue. And see, that was back in 2017, 2018. So where I've evolved from there is pretty far removed if you go back and look at those pieces. But there's still like the core of it. Like you can kind of see like the origin story of like where that little thing took root. And then I just took that in and kept evolving it and pushing it and exploring it further and further. So yeah, all that to say, it was a very long process. You have to stick with it. Giving yourself pressure is a good thing. It kind of like forces you into it. And yeah, it's really, really hard and difficult to do. So yeah, all that to say, it didn't just happen.
My professors always told me to create deadlines for myself, especially out of school. Nobody's going to give you a deadline. So one
Such
of my
great advice.
professors, yeah, she told me to sign up for shows and then start making the art for the shows.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that has stuck with me. So I
Yep.
definitely resonate with that. So that's awesome. Thinking about like different chapters and different evolutions of your art. And I guess circling back to the Pinterest board Instagram saving idea, I recently saw something that was talking about Pinterest boards specifically in, I guess, like a New Year's resolution type
Mm.
sense, more of a mood board for your year. So if
Oh,
you were to
nice.
make, so having one mood board for what you want your life to be or art that you like, and separating it out by year so that maybe you can look at them next to each other and see
Mm.
what the constant theme is throughout the years versus what new things come up and how things evolve. So that might be interesting as
Yeah,
well.
that would be really cool. Because sometimes I do go back through like my Instagram, saved collections of artwork, and I try to divide them up kind of like by medium because I think fiber art's really cool, and that's something I want to explore more. And then like sculptures and murals and abstract and then subjective work. And so I kind of keep them in those buckets. But then like you can go back and see like what I saved in 2017 and then what I saved last week. And it's really interesting to kind of because you can kind of see that progression all in one like big flow. So it is really
Yeah.
cool.
So one question I do want to ask is, being an artist, what did you think it was going to look like? And then what does it actually look like and how does that surprise you?
I think I've touched on this a little bit, but just thinking like as an artist, you're just gonna walk into the studio and ideas are gonna flow freely and the work is gonna come easily out of you onto the canvas. and and then you're gonna make all this beautiful work and galleries and curators are going to be lining up at your door to to show them and buy them and of course that was a misconception from many many years ago, but just yeah, that unrealistic picture, and I think probably brought to us courtesy of social media, right? Because artists, there are some who are very real with their journey, but most, don't really show the behind the scenes struggles or talk about it and, what it took for them to get there. And that's why I like to really highlight that because making things seem easy doesn't help anyone, you know?
Yeah.
It, it really doesn't. If anything, it hurts them. So the kind of the ease of how it would all flow for me, but then also I think my biggest misconception was like how long I thought it might take for me to achieve like some of the artistic goals that I wanted to. For example, I mean, once I realized I wanted to start painting murals and started kind of pursuing those opportunities, again, I'm not a full time artist. So it's not like I was sending out 200 cold emails, a day or anything like that. But once I started looking for opportunities, knocking on doors, things like that, applying, I mean, it took me 5 years to get my first mural opportunity. And a lot of people just don't really share that or talk about it. But it was really challenging. And it was something that like I wanted to do so badly that I just kind of kept chipping away at it. but it took 5 years. So
Yeah.
I just had no idea when I first started, taking my art seriously. Probably would say, professional artist back in 2017 when I started that residency, but was dabbling a couple years before that. But like 2017, like I'm going to do this. I'm all in, thinking like, oh, in 5 years, I'll be, I'll be having like a full-time income from my artwork. It's like, to me, I mean, that probably happens for some people, but especially if you have a full-time job, like it's very unrealistic to say or to put that expectation on yourself of in 5 years, I'm going to be there, just going at it in a part-time, time commitment kind of way. So that was
Hmm.
probably the biggest thing I had to really learn to accept and make peace with and not let it throw me off course.
Yeah, not let it discourage you.
That's the thing is that, I'm going to be making art and sharing my art with the world regardless of like how many rejections I may get or how long it takes me to get to where I want to be, always coming back to, this is the art that I feel called to make and I'm going to make it no matter what. And just really kind of putting that stake in the ground and like not letting it be swayed.
Speaking of knocking on doors and finding opportunities for yourself, I did notice that your art was featured on one of the street banners in Deep Ellum
Oh yeah.
sometime last year. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that came about? Was it affiliation with the Deep Ellum Arts Festival or some other area of Deep Ellum?
Yeah, so that was actually a few years ago. I think it might have been 2020. So back then, the organization that does the streetlight banners in Deep Ellum is the Deep Ellum Foundation, I believe. Back then, they had a different kind of marketing person, and that person decided to have an open call for the streetlight banner program, which was really cool. It was free to submit and it was an easy application. And to me, like when I'm kind of deciding like what things I want to apply to, those are like no brainers if it's free and it's an easy application. And so I was like, why not? I'm going to submit my work. And I didn't expect to get chosen, but I did. And it was really cool. And then they like auctioned off a bunch of them, I think a year or two ago for like a fundraiser. And I wanted to go down and buy my own banner, but I couldn't make it down there that day. But I thought that was really cool. So I think they have a different person in charge of that program now. I don't know that they do open calls anymore, unfortunately. I think that it's more of a, I think they come up with like a theme and then they kind of curate the artists according to that theme, is what it seems like to me. But yeah, it's just an
Yeah.
application that I probably spent about 5 minutes doing. So.
Yeah. How did you come across that open call?
I must have just seen it floating around online somewhere, either Facebook or Instagram. I see a lot of calls on Instagram probably, but I know people use like Cafe, called the callforentry.org website. I've used it before, but there's so many to wade through. I found it really time consuming to kind of like sort through that and find things that resonated with me. And then you got to go through the application process. So I still kind of like pop over there sometimes to see if there's anything, but what I've noticed is that organizations who are really excited about their open call and want to kind of get it out as far and wide as possible, more than likely have a post on Instagram. So, you know, that's usually where I see most of the calls that I submit to. That's just me. There's lots of other ones.
No, that's great advice. So applications for different open calls, if it's free,
Yeah.
definitely want to apply to that. But apart from that, what other things do you look for, I guess, when it comes to shows that you want to participate in? Because I know you like to do shows.
I mean, honestly, it definitely varies for me from year to year and kind of what I'm focusing on that particular year. For example, so early on when I first started, my strategy was I wanted to really get my work out, into shows as much as possible to connect with galleries, connect with curators, other artists, potential buyers, so forth. So I was applying to like tons and tons and tons of shows my first few years. And what I realized through that process, I mean, I learned a lot, but one of the things I learned was, what kinds of events and shows that people are actually going to purchase work from. Also, different shows have different like time commitment levels. And that kind of goes back to like the whole 9 to 5 somewhat friction because you have to really be choosy at some point of how you're spending your time. And so I realized like the time that I was spending, let's say, because I'm up in the North Dallas area, up in like Carrollton. So the time I was spending like driving all the way down to downtown Dallas and back for a drop off, down and back for a pickup, down and back for an opening reception, down and back for a closing reception. That is a lot of time that's eating into your art making schedule, right? And so it was great that I did that the first few years, and I don't like have any regrets about doing that. 'Cause again, I learned a lot. It builds up your CV, especially when you're first starting out, which is great. It shows that you're active, you're putting your work out there. So I would recommend that for an approach if you're just getting started. But then at some point, I think you kind of hit that tipping point of like, if you're not a full time artist, is saying, is this time that I'm investing going to get me to where I want to be? What is my goal as an artist? Is this going to help me reach my goal? Am I going to sell anything? um, does the organization promote the event really well? Like, are they going to help me get my name out there? And if they do all those things, great. Like, I'm on board 100%, but I definitely filter through those things more now. And last year, even, I was probably doing like, I don't know, maybe 2 to 4 shows a year, kind of once I decided to be a little bit more picky, choosy. And last year I decided I was like, I kind of got to a point where I wanted to explore my studio practice more, my mediums, my process again, like kind of where I discovered the whole like finger painting thing. I wanted to go on that journey and I wanted to just focus on that. I didn't want to have the distraction of prepping paintings for hanging, driving them to downtown, like going to events. And so I decided last year I wasn't going to apply to anything. Like no shows. And I was just going to focus on my studio practice. And I ended up doing 2 shows. I did one at Kettle Art, but because someone reached out to me about it, and it wasn't, I had inventory on hand. That's another key thing is if I don't have any inventory for a show and I would have to make something, then that's even more time you're investing. And who's to say these pieces that you created just to be in the show are even going to sell, and then like, what have you invested in that really didn't move the needle any? So yeah, so I had inventory. It was going to be kind of a very easy situation. It was a long running show. Kettle Art is great and people know about it. They have a good reputation. So that was again a no brainer for me. So I did that show and I did the Art House Dallas show. That I did create a piece for that one, but I used it as an opportunity to continue exploring what I was already exploring in the studio. And it was just one piece, and I, as a member of Art House Dallas for a long time, really want to support them and everything they do. So, and those 2 shows were very spread out. I will say that
Hmm.
too. So it wasn't like a big deal. You know what I mean? And again, it was just kind of saying like, I'm intentionally going to focus on my studio practice this year. And I applied to like publications and things like that. But there's no like, that's not a huge time investment, right? Like you send the
Yeah.
application and you maybe answer a couple emails, get some files ready. That's it.
Yeah.
And you're still getting your work out there, which is great. So there's different ways you can approach it. I always tell people like think about what your goal is. What are you actually trying to achieve, in your art career? And then use that to determine what you apply for or participate in.
Hmm. Apart from going to shows that are maybe recurring or organizations that regularly have shows and figuring out if they are a show that would sell art, what are other ways that you have kind of kept tabs on that? How do you know that it's going to be a show where your art is
Yeah.
sold?
Yeah, there's a couple of things with that. As I mentioned, one of them is just experience. So, there's some organizations that I've showed with several times, and if you show with an organization several times, you start to see a pattern emerge. So experience for one, and then for two, there is some like research you can do right before you even spend your $40 or whatever to apply, and like look up the curators and see, what kind of work do they do if they do work, or, what kind of work they show on their Instagram, because that's going to tell you what kind of work they're drawn to. Yeah, do some research on the curators, do some research on the organization. There's a lot of really lovely galleries around here in Dallas, but I know by the research that I've done or like shows that I've been to, it's like, well, they're only showing this kind of work. Like, there's no way they would show my like, pop sci-fi surrealism, because that's just not what their gallery's about. And they're doing that. They're carving out their niche for their client base, right? That's kind of how I do it. And sometimes you just don't know. And sometimes you just kind of have to like, go with your best guess. And again, you just learn from experience. But I will say that, Deep Ellum Art Co. has some really cool shows. That gallery space is where I've sold most of my work. so consistently. But I kind of knew that going in because I'd seen some of the shows that they'd done and knew that they had a lot of like really interesting, cool work that, mine I could see it fitting in there, if that makes sense. So, and they obviously do a very good job getting people in the door, and providing those people a way to buy because, again, like that's where I've made a lot of my sales from shows. So,
I guess pivoting back to this chapter where you're not focusing on shows, you're focusing more on growth, growing your studio practice. What kind of things are you learning or hope to learn during this time?
I'm definitely not closed off to shows this year like I was last year. It's not like a concerted effort to like put blinders on and not do any. But definitely very selective at this point. But yeah, so this year I'm still continuing to kind of pick up where I left off last year. I'm doing, I discovered I really love doing these like oil finger paintings. So I'm doing more of that. The way that I decided that I wanted to kind of keep exploring different things is, so Angela Pitts and I were kind of like spitballing at the end of last year. And I don't even know how we came up with it, but I actually had been laid off from my full-time job. And I was like, well, I can't really go explore too much because I don't have all this like extra cash on hand to buy art supplies. And then, kind of like as the conversation progressed, I realized like we actually have tons of art supplies sitting around that, we bought and thought we were going to do something with it. We never did. And so we came up with the idea to have like kind of like a monthly challenge of like, let's find something that we already have and have like a theme and make something according to that theme or using that material or both. And that way we're not just like sitting around, kind of like we discussed earlier, like, what the heck do I make? I don't know what I'm going to make. It's just already there, the materials and the theme. So yeah, that's what we've been doing. We've been so every month we explore a new material, either upcycled, a lot of it's upcycled, or just like something we have on hand. So January was like cardboard. So I attempted making a cardboard sculpture. I did not finish. I have to come back to it, but that was really fun. And what I learned from that was I like working with my hands. I like that kind of thing. Let's see. And then February was making new art out of art you already have, which was really easy for me because I make these like collages with planets out of old artwork that I already have on hand. So that was something I was already doing. It's like great. And then the next month, March, was like old, like spring cleaning theme, old clothes or like fabric, any kind of like textiles you have laying around. Because, as artists, we just like scroll away random stuff all the
Yeah.
time, you know? And so I'm making a astronaut helmet out of like all kinds of fabrics and ribbons right now. So yeah, it's been really great because I'm still for the most part just sticking with my subject matter because I do want to kind of like stay consistent with that and I like it. But exploring like all kinds of different ways to do it and learning what I like to, what I don't like to do. And yeah, it's been really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely a fun way to get into some methods that you wouldn't be thinking about before.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I think it goes back to the whole essence behind setting your own deadlines or giving yourself pressure. It's like we have set this challenge for ourselves so that we can stick with it and feel it's a low pressure commitment, obviously, because we put it on ourselves. But, we're putting it out into the world, we're sharing it with other people. So there's a level of accountability there. And, if I were to kind of, I see it being more productive this year than last year, intentionally. So last year I wanted to have no pressure and just kind of like, feel my way through it. But now this year, since I have some answers, this is giving me some structure to keep pushing it forward. So,
I guess another way another way that you're diversifying your art methods is murals. You said you're doing a garage mural. I know that you've done large scale murals before. So let me ask you how that's gone. Have you enjoyed it? Is that something that you would want to keep pursuing then?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the weather here in Dallas right now is just so beautiful. I feel like there's really no better day for me than being outside on a day like today painting. I mean, it's just, there's something about it. I don't know. And as I was thinking about it, the first time I did the first couple murals I did, I realized that, because I was kind of in this journey of like, I don't like paintbrushes, but I'm using paintbrushes on these murals. And I was like, what is the differentiator here? And I think that with murals, it's tapping more into that designer side of my brain And so I really enjoy like the clean lines and the design aspect of a mural, but getting to execute it with a paintbrush. So yeah, I really do like it. I love the process. I love seeing like my artwork really big. It's just so cool to stand in front of like, a building sized painting of yours, that you did. And
Yeah.
so yeah, no, it's really great. I would like to do more. I've been trying to do more. It is really tricky when you do have a full-time job. You just have to be again selective with your opportunities, and sometimes you just can't do it because of your commitments. But just going back to it is very competitive. It's very competitive, especially here in Dallas. And so, we have a lot of really fantastic muralists here in the area, and they have these like very robust portfolios of work that they've done. And clients like working with people that they know they can count on to execute a project really well. And so it's just an easy choice to go with a lot of the more established muralists here. So that makes it more difficult for people like me who aren't like full-time muralists, right? Who just really enjoy doing it now and again to like really kind of like throw our hat into the ring because yeah, it is so competitive. So pushing forward on that, that's one of the reasons for doing the garage mural, besides the fact that I just like want to. I want to be able to have like another piece in my mural portfolio. And, all that to say, like, if there's something you really want to do that's really hard to get into, like murals, like the best way to do it is to make that opportunity for yourself and not wait around for someone to pick you. Cause again, it took me 5 years.
Yeah.
Make your own opportunities where you can make it happen. That's how I've gotten a lot of the opportunities that I've gotten is by doing it myself first, by self-selecting. So
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
yeah, of course.
Well, you've given us a lot of advice and resources today, and I really appreciate that. I guess one last question is there anything that you would want to leave for, I guess, artists like us who are either getting started or trying to get back into things or just trying to figure out how to make it work? What would you tell them, I guess, from what you've learned or what you've been noticing lately?
If I was going to go back to myself in 2015 or whatever, definitely find a community of artists. I think that's one of the things that has been really crucial for me and like staying consistent and sticking with it is surrounding myself with other artists who are going through the same thing, who can support you, encourage you. When you're in a community of artists, like Art House Dallas, for example, you meet regularly and, there's like again, a very low pressure level, but some accountability, right? Because, you're meeting every month and you want to be able to talk about, this cool thing you're working on. And it really it's easier to stay consistent and to stick with it when you surround yourself with other people who are doing the same thing and you don't feel so alone. So I think that's probably the first one I would recommend. And like even, we have Art House Dallas here, but even like there's online communities, so many online communities of artists that you can join who have like Facebook groups, and you can just like put questions in the Facebook group and people will answer because they love to help. And so even online communities, if you can't do like an in-person one, it's just like as much community as you can, definitely recommend it. And then my other piece of advice is, I guess it's not really like a resource or anything, but like, try to, as much as you possibly can, follow your own arrow. And I feel like I've talked about this a lot already, but when I first started out, one of the things I would do is like, because I was on like Instagram a lot, I would see artists doing things and think like, oh, well, like I should do that too. I should do it that way, or I should make that kind of art, or I should be in shows or whatever. And I would say, try not to be swayed early on in your journey by what other people are doing and really listen to yourself and what you like and what you lights you up, because if you do things that you don't enjoy, it's not going to go the distance. You can go. The reason I've been able to go the distance with the work that I've been doing is because I love it, because I really enjoy it. And I feel like there's always new ideas there to pull out of my subject matter. But, you have to find that thing that does that for you. And even like when it comes down to business, lots of artists do like art markets. I've chosen not to do art markets because I know that would be like my worst nightmare, to be confined to a booth. having to talk to the public all day. Not to mention, it's a ton of work to set up a booth, right? You have to have a lot of inventory, and I don't tend to keep a lot of inventory on hand. And so I've just made that decision for myself. But a lot of artists love doing it and they're very successful with it. So my advice there is just like, don't think that you have to do something a certain way because other successful artists are doing that. Like, find the thing that is the best fit for you. And just learn how to like pay attention again to those signals that you're feeling when they come up.
Great. Well, I think that's a great place to stop. I want to
Awesome.
thank you again for your time today, Bree, and
Well, of course.
always a pleasure. And I'll see you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to know what you thought about the episode, so please answer the Q&A and share any thoughts by leaving us a review. You can find Bree on Instagram at Bree Smith Art, that's BREE Smith Art, and her website, breesmith.com, where you can see her work and browse her shop.